Hi, Michael. My name is Nina Stead. I'm the head of marketing at LAAIMPA, and I would love to welcome you to our winners interviews. And of course, first of all, congratulations on winning Best Horror for Awful Dreams. Ugh, that was haunting. That was haunting, very powerful, deeply poetic work that truly stands out. And it's an honor for us to have your film in the festival program.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm very excited. It's an honor for me to be here.
Yay. So let's go ahead and I'm going to ask you a few questions about your process and your creative vision. And of course, one thing that stood out to me was how Awful Dreams, it felt almost mythological and symbolic. What initial image, maybe thought, maybe an inner impulse became the starting point for this film?
I think the starting point was essentially the poem that's been written by a good friend of mine, Tom Glover, who is also here in New York. He's a creative director, and he wrote this poem many, many years ago. And I think he recorded it at some point with Sir John Hurt when he was alive. He passed away, sadly. But you might know he's a famous British actor. So for a very long time, he had this recording, and I always felt like it's an interesting short story. And then fast forward, I think it was like the end of 2022 when generative AI became, good enough so you can generate moving images out of it. I started to look into it first with local models on my workstation here, but it wasn't good enough. So I kind of picked it up by the end of last year since the models got better, and then basically put the whole thing together. But the starting point was essentially a poem that's been written by Tom. But I always wanted, since the poem in itself is already very poetic, so I wanted to keep that poetic notion while maintaining at the same time. Obviously, it's a very horrific topic. So I always wanted to have that balance between a poetic overall look and feel, but at the same time still that keep that horror theme throughout.
Right, I see. So when it comes to what about the concept of a butcher haunted in his dreams by the animals he has killed? That is highly symbolic. What themes were you most interested in exploring through this story?
I think it is a bit symbolic, but I think it also resonates with, most of us, since dreams are always a reflection of what you do throughout your life or throughout your day. So if you're a butcher, the likelihood that you would dream about something like that is quite high. It taps a little bit into mythology, and I did not want to go too deep into it, in terms of religion and these kind of things, but we play a little bit with it, like the rhyme or the whole poem itself. It sounds a little bit like, you could argue it's a bit like a gospel, and at the very end we have that one sentence that kind of manifests everything. And then the butcher, he also goes through to that the pastor in England. It has a little bit that notion in there, but there was never really meant to be, you know, symbolism was never the starting point of it. There, we put a little bit of it in there, but it was always a bit more on the poetic side of things.
Mhm. And when it comes to the audience's reaction for you, were you aiming to evoke specific emotions, maybe fear, unease, empathy, or to leave space for a more personal experience of the viewer?
I think you should always, in my opinion, you should always leave a bit of, room for interpretation, since people will always see things and interpret things in different ways. Someone might be very shocked about this film, others might, they might not be so much shocked about it. Um, but obviously, we wanted to always evoke a little bit that horrific feeling and really open up the images to that. So there is a little bit, well, not just a little bit, there is blood in there, and there is, like, gory elements in there. But at the same time, it was never meant to be, a splatter film in the sense that you reveal every single detail. We always wanted to play with that notion. When you have these classic horror movies, you never show the monster, in its every detail. You always just allude to it, and like you show little tiny pieces, and then your brain puts everything together. And that's a little bit what we wanted to do here as well, that the majority happens in your brain, and the film just touches and tickles a little bit at the starting point of that.
Me as a person who most of my dreams for some reason are horror or thriller, where I'm the main victim or the main person who is dealing with all of that. Watching this, my imagination creating the worst of the worst of the worst. So I
Well,
guess.
I'm happy to hear, so it worked.
Yes, I mean, at some point I thought of starting to write out my dreams and maybe selling them here to Hollywood because the things that are happening are crazy. And watching your piece in particular really gave me that feeling of goosebumps when you're dreaming and you are extremely scared and in the dream you're not sure whether it's a dream or no and um, it definitely left a very very strong mark and as I said the film has a very distinct visual rigor and almost tactile texture. How did you approach building this visual world?
Yeah, that was something that was very important to me. When I look at most of the AI, not all of them, but a lot of the films or the projects that I see currently in the AI space, to me, it always feels like so polished and so clean that you can just subconsciously sense it's AI generated. But I always wanted to avoid that. I always wanted to have that tactile, classic cinematic look and feel with all the imperfections, like, the grain, the depth of field, things are out of focus. And sometimes it's just blurry shapes, but it's never really super crisp. So that was really important to me. Also, because I'm someone who's very familiar with like a lot of movies from the 80s and 90s, and they always had that unpolished look and feel, which to me always feels more cinematic and in some way, I would argue also more emotional. So I definitely wanted to have that in there. And at the same time, there was also, as you can tell, I wanted to have a cohesive look and feel in terms of colors. So there is also a bit of an idea to have these, deep reds in there, obviously, because there is a lot of blood involved. But at the same time, I wanted to have this yellow notion throughout because it reminds a little bit of rotting flesh, you could say. So to have that as a cohesive theme throughout, it was really important. And then I essentially used Mid-Journey, Runway, and Minimax to bring it to life, and mainly, created the keyframes in Runway. Sorry, in Mid-Journey, and then use these keyframes in Runway and Minimax. Sometimes I also just created some of the snippets in Minimax. Yeah, that's essentially the process and the thinking about it.
And now that you're mentioning the AI tools, I remember that you have mentioned that you use AI as a tool rather than a replacement for creative vision. How did this philosophy shape your decisions while making the film?
Uh, yeah, I think AI will always, in my opinion, be a tool. It will never replace creativity. You always need to have your idea and your vision first, and then it helps you bring it to life and to amplify it. So in this specific case, obviously with AI, if you would do a project like this without AI, it would be way more tricky. You would obviously need a set, you would have actors, you would have, I would argue, a lot of CG or puppet build involved. So it's a huge help to bring these visions to life without going on a set. But it will never replace an idea in the first place, or taste, or a vision. I think it's a tool that elevates it and that amplifies it, and that obviously for if you're a single person and you don't have a big team, it's a huge help to bring these things to life using AI.
I see. When it comes to the narration associated with John Hurt's voice, that adds a deep emotional layer to the film. I would like to get some clarification whether actor himself participated in the voice recording or whether his voice was recreated or used through technology. And how did you approach working with voice and narrative rhythm overall?
That is something that Tom should speak to, but he's not here today. However, the voice was it was recorded before AI was even a bigger thing. I think it was. I
Oh,
can't tell you how many years ago, but it was. I would say it was quite a few years ago. So it was
mhm.
a classic voiceover recording. There is no AI involved in the voiceover, and I think the approach was to have him read it as poetic as possible, since it's a poem, and to really have a certain rhythm in there, which I think helps carry the story throughout as well. So I think he already created a nice pace the way he just narrates the poem, and then it was also easier to tell the story, especially in the edit, because you already have a rhythm, and the edit then follows the rhythm versus finding that rhythm first and then have the scenes and the dialogue and these kind of things. But it was not AI generated, and there's no AI involved in the voiceover recording. There was a little bit of, we partnered with a sound design studio in London, and they helped us to fine tune it and to really bring out the characteristics of his voice, but there was no AI involved in it.
Amazing. I think that's why it felt so real. And throughout the viewing, we felt so connected, even though it's a horror movie and usually you expect like a screamer or you expect just like a little shock or something. Very often that's the stereotype. But throughout the whole piece, even though it was very scary to me, it was very gory, but I felt very connected through the voice. And of course, last but not least question, given your vast experience, because we read your bio across both commercial and cultural projects, where does Awful Dreams sit within your broader artistic journey?
I think it's a bit of a new chapter, I would argue, tapping into filmmaking and seeing where things go. So I've been working, in the advertising industry. Well, I still work in the advertising industry, in the creative industry with a lot of commercial projects. This certainly is not a commercial project. It's more like a private project. So I would rather put it in the cultural space, but it's a very interesting, evolving space. So as many other people, other creatives, I'm exploring opportunities and see where things might lead. But I'm very excited about all these tools, and it's just such a wonderful opportunity to bring visions to life and to bring things to life that you would never ever be able to, like 10 years ago without having a vast amount of money or a big team.
Of course, and with your experience in advertising, we have a new category, best advertisement in our festival. If that is up your alley, we would love to see your work there. And on that note, I would love to thank you for such a powerful and thought-provoking work. And we look forward to your future projects, Michael.
Yeah, thank you so much, Nina. I will keep that in mind. If I ever create an ad using AI, I will definitely submit it.
Yay, let's do it. Thank you very much and have a wonderful day.
Thank you. You too. Have a good one, Nina. Bye bye.
Bye bye.